Elizabeth I is considered one of the greatest queens to have ever reigned. She suffered from a bout of a very deadly illness that had been around in England for some time. Smallpox over the years killed millions around the globe.
History remembers her as a legend, one of the most powerful rulers England ever produced. But there's a deeply disturbing part of Elizabeth I's story that history has desperately tried to keep hidden until now. Artificial intelligence just cracked the code and found something extremely troubling inside her DNA. This clue would finally explain why she constantly masked her true image behind layers of makeup and wigs, why she never married or had children, and why the final days of her life were filled with extremely strange and troubling events no one could explain. The Tudor bloodline. Elizabeth I ruled for 45 years and shaped England into a global power. But the foundation of her reign was built on family secrets no one at court dared to name. And many of those secrets trace back to her genes. It all began with her father, Henry VIII. Henry was born in 1491 into the Tudor dynasty, a house with a strong grip on power, even after decades of civil war. From the start, Henry understood one thing clearly: a dynasty survives only if it produces a male heir. And that single obsession would come to define his marriages, his politics, and ultimately the future of England. Henry's first wife was Catherine of Aragon, a Spanish princess of royal blood. Their marriage lasted over 20 years. During that time, Catherine endured a devastating pattern of pregnancies. She experienced multiple miscarriages, stillbirths, and infant deaths. Only one child survived beyond early childhood, a girl named Mary. But Henry's greatest desire was to have a male heir, and he was willing to do almost anything to have one. That obsession pushed him toward a woman who would change history. Her name was Anne Boleyn, and while she came from a powerful lineage, she wasn't originally born into royalty. She was the daughter of Thomas Boleyn, a skilled diplomat and courtier, and Elizabeth Howard, a member of one of England's most influential noble families. Anne spent her early years in the Netherlands and France, where she received an education rare for women of her time. She learned languages, court etiquette, and the politics of influence. When she eventually returned to England in the 1520s, she was clearly different from most young women of her time. Anne entered court as a lady-in-waiting to Queen Catherine, and it was there that Henry first noticed her. Slowly, his interest turned into obsession, but Anne refused to follow the path her sister Mary had taken. Mary was originally a mistress of the king, but Anne refused to be treated like a hidden mistress. Anne made it clear to Henry that if she were to entertain his interests, they had to be officially married. This single decision would force Henry into the most dangerous decision of his reign. Just to marry Anne, Henry had to denounce the Roman Catholic Church. He declared himself head of the Church of England and annulled his marriage to Catherine. This act triggered the English Reformation, reshaping religion, law, and power across the country. In January 1533, Henry and Anne tied the knot in secret, and by September of that same year, Anne gave birth to a child at Greenwich Palace. But to Henry's utmost dismay, the child was a girl. Elizabeth's birth was both a triumph and a disappointment. She was healthy, alive, and legitimate under the new church. But she was not the son Henry wanted. And while the couple wanted to keep trying for another child, the same tragedy that had plagued Henry's first marriage struck again. His first wife, Catherine, had 6 known pregnancies, yet only Mary lived. After Anne gave birth to Elizabeth, her later pregnancies also ended in miscarriage. This unfortunate pattern prompted scholars and researchers to explore a possible genetic explanation. One theory, proposed by researchers Katrina Banks Whitley and Kira Kramer, suggests Henry may have carried a rare blood group known as Kell-IE positive. In simple terms, if a Kell-positive man fathers children with Kell-negative women, the first pregnancy can succeed, but later pregnancies may fail due to a condition called hemolytic disease of the newborn. The mother's body begins to attack the fetus, leading to miscarriages, stillbirths, or infants who die shortly after birth. Many researchers also believe that Henry's own health could have been another possible cause of this tragic pattern. After he crossed the age of 40, his physical and mental condition declined sharply. He gained extreme weight and suffered from chronic leg ulcers that never healed. But it wasn't just physical health that faced problems. His emotional and mental health also suffered the same decline. Henry's behavior grew volatile. He became suspicious, cruel, and even paranoid. Some historians believe autoimmune or genetic conditions linked to the Kell blood group, including a rare disorder called McLeod syndrome, could explain both his physical breakdown and psychological changes. While this theory was never officially confirmed, it may be the final puzzle to understanding Henry's controversial reputation and how it affected his daughter, Elizabeth I. Elizabeth inherited half of this legacy. The remaining half came from her mother, Anne Boleyn, who had a dense network of noble blood. Anne's father descended from wealthy Norfolk merchants who rose into aristocracy. Her mother's Howard lineage connected Elizabeth to one of England's most powerful families, and, through them, to the Plantagenets. Anne also carried Anglo-Irish blood through Margaret Butler, daughter of the Earl of Ormond. This meant Elizabeth's bloodline was not weak or marginal. It was deeply rooted in English and Irish nobility on both sides. Despite later claims that Anne's marriage was invalid, researchers have confirmed that Elizabeth's genetic legitimacy was definitely strong. Modern genetic genealogy has also examined the Tudor male line more broadly. The Tudors trace their origins to Welsh ancestors from Penmynyd, descending from Ednyfed Ffychan in the 13th century. Studies of related male lines suggest the Tudor Y DNA likely belonged to haplogroup R1b, common across Western Europe and associated with Celtic ancestry. Elizabeth, as a woman, did not inherit Y DNA, but she carried the full weight of this lineage in her body. She carried their ambition, their strategies, their resilience, and sadly, the vulnerabilities no one could openly discuss. But that wasn't all she carried. Because by the time Elizabeth took the throne, the hidden risks, silent conditions, and biological limits that were rooted deep in her blood would begin to haunt her reign. And it all began with terrible health struggles that Elizabeth worked desperately to hide from the world. The chaotic health of Elizabeth I. While she was queen, Elizabeth showed no signs of weakness. She rode on horseback just like men would. She delivered long speeches without notes and stood for hours in heavy gowns during ceremonies. Her image was carefully controlled, painted again and again as powerful and timeless. But behind palace doors, her physical body was under attack. From her early years on the throne to the final months of her life, Elizabeth's health was unstable, unpredictable, and often frightening. But those who watched her closely believed this turmoil was not random. They believed it was deeply rooted in her genes. The scariest health crisis Elizabeth I ever faced happened in October 1562, when she fell ill with smallpox, one of the deadliest diseases of the early modern world. At the time, smallpox killed roughly 1 in 3 people who caught it. When the queen became bedridden with fever, rashes, and weakness, panic spread through the court. She was only 29 years old. She was unmarried. She had no named heir. If she died, England would be thrown into chaos. For weeks, she hovered near death. Members of her council prepared for the worst. Drafts of emergency succession plans were discussed in whispers. Foreign powers watched closely. Inside her chamber, Elizabeth drifted in and out of consciousness. The illness left her body scarred, and although she eventually survived, her face was permanently marked. From that point forward, she began using heavy cosmetics to hide the damage and scars. She constantly made use of white makeup, but what she never realized was that this solution came with its own danger. After smallpox, Elizabeth I was never fully well again. As the years passed, she reportedly suffered repeated episodes of fever and sickness. She suffered from chills, weakness, and long periods of general discomfort. These illnesses came and went, but physicians were never able to figure out the cause. Some blamed the cold, damp conditions of Tudor palaces. Others blamed stress. But modern researchers believe the true cause of her health crisis is likely a combination of factors, including an immune system weakened by earlier disease and long-term exposure to harmful substances. Multiple reports from Elizabeth's court described swelling in her hands and feet. This swelling may have been caused by circulation problems or fluid retention. At times, painful sores were said to have appeared on her skin. These were painful, slow to heal, and often hidden beneath layers of clothing and makeup. But the very cosmetics she relied on, especially lead-based white paint known as Venetian ceruse, only damaged her skin further. Lead seeps into the body, and over time, it can poison the blood, harm organs, and affect the mind. Another health problem Elizabeth faced was constant fatigue. She often complained of exhaustion. She reportedly struggled to sleep and spent most nights awake, pacing or sitting alone with her thoughts. The insomnia weakened her further, making it harder to recover from her other illness. Yet Elizabeth refused to slow down. She continued to mask her problems from the world because to rest was to appear weak, and weakness was dangerous for a woman ruling alone. Her physical health wasn't the only part of her life that suffered. Her mental state also declined. Elizabeth I experienced deep episodes of depression, especially after personal losses. The death of Amy Robsart, the wife of Robert Dudley, shook her deeply. Later, when Dudley himself died, her grief became too overwhelming. Historians recorded that she withdrew from court completely. She refused to eat and even shut herself away for days at a time. Refusing to eat eventually became a pattern for her during her depressive episodes. Some researchers believe this was just an expression of grief, but there are some others who believe it must have been tied to an illness. Either way, it left her vulnerable and without nourishment. In her later years, Elizabeth began to exhibit even more troubling behaviors. She reportedly spoke of seeing figures or spirits in her chambers. She claimed the rooms felt crowded, even when she was alone. Some historians believe these accounts may have pointed to exhaustion, grief, and long-term exposure to toxic cosmetics. Lead poisoning can cause confusion, hallucinations, and mood changes. Combined with chronic insomnia and stress, the effects could be severe. Elizabeth also suffered from intense mood swings that were very frequent. She could be warm and witty one moment, then sharp and suspicious the next. She constantly expressed an irrational fear of being betrayed, plotted against, and even poisoned. While some caution was wise in a dangerous political world, her reactions were far too extreme. In addition to her mental health, her physical condition continued to decline even more rapidly. She suffered from severe dental problems, common in her time due to sugar-rich diets and poor hygiene. By her later years, many of her teeth were gone. This affected her speech and facial structure. It also caused her pain and infections and made it difficult to eat. Her appearance changed, and once again, more dangerous makeup was needed to maintain the image of ageless authority. This constant use of makeup took a terrible toll on her skin. The lead-based cosmetics she used cracked and irritated her face, leading to sores beneath the paint. Yet, instead of stopping, she applied even more layers. Elizabeth also complained of stiffness and aches, especially as she aged. Walking became harder. Standing for long ceremonies required effort. Some historians believe she suffered from arthritis or rheumatism, yet she continued to appear in public, leaning on attendants, hiding pain behind ritual and posture. Eventually, her eyesight began to decline. Reading became difficult. Candlelight, smoke, and long hours of work only made it worse. Yet, she refused to withdraw from her duties. All of this unfolded under intense pressure. Elizabeth ruled in a constant state of threat. There were constant plots against her life, She was also constantly pressured by the need to produce an heir. By the final years of her life, the signs could no longer be fully hidden. Her body was tired. Her mind was burdened. Those closest to her sensed that something deeper was wrong. Not just illness, but a devastating decline tied to everything she had endured. And when Elizabeth I finally died, the circumstances surrounding her death were even more disturbing than the illnesses that plagued her life. The disturbing details of Elizabeth's death. In the final days of her life, Elizabeth I began displaying extremely disturbing behaviors no one could explain. Those who attended her were deeply unsettled by what they saw. Her physical body was failing, but her willpower seemed locked in struggle with what was coming. For 4 days before her death, Elizabeth I refused to lie down. Chroniclers recorded that she would not go to bed under any circumstance. Servants and ladies-in-waiting tried repeatedly to move her, but she resisted. Instead, she stood or sat upright on cushions placed on the floor. She reportedly remained there for hours, unmoving, exhausted, and silent. Some historians believe this was symbolic, that her refusal to lie down was her way of rejecting defeat and death. Others believe the refusal came from physical pain. Lying down may have worsened her breathing or intensified discomfort in her body, but those close to her sensed something deeper. This was not just physical distress. It was a queen clinging to authority through posture alone. Some historians also spoke about a strange and troubling gesture Elizabeth displayed in her final days. By that time, she had lost most of her teeth, and infections were common. But some other attendants believed this was a sign of inner distress she could no longer hide. As the days passed, Elizabeth grew even more silent. She fell into heavy depression and refused food almost entirely. Meals were brought and removed untouched. She spoke little, and when she did, her words were brief and distant. She even reportedly sat motionless for long periods, staring into space. Courtiers grew alarmed. They knew the end was near. This was not the sharp, alert ruler they had known. Elizabeth also isolated herself from governance completely. Council meetings were halted, and matters of state were left unresolved. Finally, on the 24th of March, 1603, Elizabeth I died at the age of 69 years. She had ruled England for 45 years. By the time of her death, her physical decline was impossible to hide. Surprisingly, no post-mortem examination was allowed, and as a result, the exact cause of Elizabeth's death remains unknown. What most researchers rely on are theories built from her symptoms, behavior, and the medical knowledge of her time. One of the most discussed theories is lead poisoning, caused by Venetian ceruse, a toxic cosmetic Elizabeth used for decades. Chronic lead poisoning can lead to organ failure. The more the skin breaks down, the more lead enters the bloodstream. This creates a cycle that only worsens with continued use. This theory explains many of her symptoms, including the sores, the hair loss, the fatigue, the mental changes, and the frailty at the end. Another possibility is blood poisoning, also known as septicemia. Elizabeth suffered from untreated infections throughout her life. Dental abscesses, skin sores, and open wounds were common in Tudor England. Without antibiotics, even minor infections could become deadly. If bacteria entered her bloodstream, it could have caused fever, weakness, confusion, and rapid decline. This theory explains her refusal to eat, her exhaustion, and her sudden withdrawal. Some researchers have also pointed to cancer as a possible cause. Her difficulty eating and visible decline also support this idea. But without examination, this remains mere speculation. Some researchers have also highlighted respiratory illness as another contender. Reports mention that Elizabeth suffered from frequent coughing, weakness, and fever. At the time, Tudor palaces were cold, damp, and filled with smoke. Pneumonia was common and often fatal, especially in the elderly. Lying down may have worsened her breathing, and this offers another explanation for her refusal to go to bed during her final days. Yet, the most controversial possibility scholars have explored is the theory of psychological collapse. Elizabeth I had endured extraordinary stress. She outlived nearly everyone close to her. She ruled alone. She carried the burden of succession until the very end. Her silence, refusal to lie down, and reported visions of ghosts may point to severe depression or delirium. Exhaustion, grief, insomnia, and illness can fracture the mind as effectively as the body. Yet, the truth may be a combination of all these factors, or none of them. Because there's another side to Elizabeth's story that raises unsettling questions. Why did a woman so powerful, so intelligent, and so guarded choose never to marry and never to have children at all? Why Elizabeth I never married? In an age when queens were expected to marry quickly and produce heirs, Elizabeth I made the shocking decision to rule alone. Year after year, pressure mounted from the people. The Parliament begged, foreign courts waited, and England feared for its future. Yet Elizabeth remained single until the end of her life. This choice left England without a direct Tudor heir, and when she died, the crown had to be passed to James VI of Scotland, who became James I of England. The Tudor line ended with her. But long before that moment, Elizabeth had already transformed her singleness into something powerful. She became known as the Virgin Queen. Elizabeth turned her unmarried status into a political identity. She presented herself as pure, untouched, and fully devoted to her people. England became her spouse, and loyalty to the crown was her only concern. But behind this decision were real men, real proposals, and real reasons she said no. One of Elizabeth's earliest suitors was Philip II of Spain. Philip proposed marriage in 1559, shortly after Elizabeth became queen. He was no stranger to England. He had previously been married to Elizabeth's sister, Mary I, but that marriage had been deeply irrelevant. So, Philip decided to make a politically motivated proposal to Elizabeth. He strongly believed that a marriage to the Queen of England would strengthen Catholic influence and secure an alliance against France, especially because at the time, many English subjects feared Spanish control and Catholic domination. Surprisingly, Elizabeth declined his proposal. She understood the risk. Marrying Philip would have tied England to foreign power and reopened religious wounds. The memory of her sister's reign was still fresh, and the people would not accept another Spanish king at their side. The next suitor was Robert Dudley. Dudley was different. He was English, and from the earliest days of her reign, he was her closest companion. They laughed together, argued together, and trusted each other deeply. They became so close that rumors began following them everywhere. Some believed they were secretly married. Others believed it was only a matter of time. But Dudley had a wife. In 1560, Amy Robsart died after falling down a staircase. The circumstances of her death were extremely suspicious, and if Elizabeth had married Dudley, the scandal would have been impossible to contain. In fact, powerful nobles opposed the match, and Elizabeth had to hesitate. But the most surprising courtship Elizabeth entertained was with Francis, Duke of Anjou, the younger son of Henry II of France and Catherine de' Medici. He was much younger than Elizabeth. In the late 1570s and early 1580s, she openly entertained the idea of marriage to him. In fact, she reportedly called him her frog and kissed him in front of courtiers as they watched in disbelief. This courtship was strategic. France was a counterweight to Spain. Hence, a marriage between them could shift the balance of power in Europe. But there was one problem. Francis was Catholic, and the people feared foreign influence all over again. So, the Parliament resisted the marriage, and Elizabeth had to withdraw. But beyond these individual suitors, there were also deeper reasons for her decision to stay single. Elizabeth used marriage as a tool for diplomacy. By remaining single, she could negotiate endlessly without committing. She could promise hope to one power while leaning toward another. Spain, France, and even Sweden were kept guessing. This flexibility kept England independent and avoided binding alliances that could drag the country into war. Marriage also meant she could lose her control. In a patriarchal society, a husband would expect authority. Elizabeth understood this danger better than anyone. She famously said she wished to be both King and Queen of England, and remaining unmarried ensured that no man could claim power through her. Some historians also believe there were personal reasons behind her decision too. Elizabeth grew up watching the concept of marriage destroy lives. Her father, Henry VIII, married 6 times. 2 of his wives were executed, including Elizabeth's mother, Anne Boleyn, when Elizabeth was only 2 years old. Marriage, for her, was tied to danger, betrayal, and death. She also watched her sister Mary's marriage unravel politically. Mary lost popular support, and England suffered unrest. Elizabeth learned from that failure. Publicly, she framed her choice as devotion. She told her people she was married to England itself. Yet one question never went away. Was her childlessness also purely a choice? Some historians suspect Elizabeth may have faced medical barriers. In 1560 and 1561, rumors spread that she suffered from swelling and a mysterious illness. Some believed these episodes involved reproductive health problems. Some researchers also came up with some controversial theories that suggest she suffered from androgen insensitivity syndrome, a rare genetic condition in which a person has XY chromosomes but develops a female appearance and lacks a uterus. This conspiracy theory could explain her lifelong virginity and lack of menstruation, though these claims were never proven. Elizabeth left behind so many questions about her body and her genetics, questions that only modern analysis could even begin to approach. How AI could reveal the truth. For centuries, the mysteries surrounding Elizabeth I have remained just mysteries. Historians were left with letters, rumors, and surface observations. Modern scholars could only circle the same questions without answers. But now, artificial intelligence could finally change that equation by reading what history itself could not see. One of the first areas of focus artificial intelligence would provide answers to would be the issue of fertility. While the world already knows how inherited reproductive risks may have existed in the Tudor line, AI would take that further. By analyzing genetic variants linked to pregnancy loss, implantation failure, or immune response during gestation, it could identify whether Elizabeth carried inherited traits that made childbearing difficult or impossible. AI could also examine markers tied to hormonal balance and reproductive function. Conditions like endometriosis or polycystic ovary syndrome leave genetic signatures. These conditions are often invisible externally, but can really affect fertility, energy levels, and pain. If Elizabeth carried such markers, it would explain both her childlessness and many aspects of her physical decline without relying on political motives alone. Beyond reproduction, AI would finally answer the questions surrounding her chronic illness. Modern genetics has been able to identify specific variants that increase the risk of autoimmune conditions in people. AI could screen for markers associated with disorders that attack joints, soft tissue, or blood vessels. This would explain why her symptoms persisted and worsened with age rather than resolving. Some of her neurological and psychological traits would also be understood. Genes linked to sleep regulation, mood stability, and sensory processing are now well documented. AI could identify predispositions toward insomnia, migraines, depression, or anxiety. This would place her depression, withdrawal, and behavioral shifts into a biological context, rather than framing them solely as emotional responses to loss or pressure. Researchers could also finally understand the science behind the deterioration of her physical looks. Not everyone exposed to harsh substances experiences the same damage. AI could examine genetic variants related to collagen production, skin repair, and inflammation. If Elizabeth lacked protective variants, It would explain why cosmetic use caused severe breakdown rather than mild irritation. Another factor that researchers are extremely curious about is how lead exposure affected her. Some humans detoxify heavy metals more efficiently than others. I could identify whether Elizabeth carried weaker variants in detoxification pathways. If so, even moderate exposure to dangerous cosmetics could have caused cumulative damage. This would explain why cosmetic use led to neurological symptoms, hair loss, fatigue, and decline far beyond surface effects. AI would also detect why she lost all her hair earlier than most women. Scientists would finally understand if she suffered from hair fragility or autoimmune hair loss. Combined with her known toxin exposure, research would clarify why her hair loss progressed rapidly and did not reverse. Perhaps the most intriguing detail AI could provide answers to would be her psychological resilience. Elizabeth endured decades of threat, isolation, and political strain. AI could identify variants related to stress response. Some genes allow individuals to function under pressure while silently accumulating damage. This would explain how she maintained authority while privately deteriorating. But this testing would go beyond just Elizabeth herself. By comparing genetic data across the Tudor bloodline, it could trace vulnerabilities that the entire family shares. AI could detect patterns linking her father's physical and mental decline, her brother's fragility, and her sister's reproductive complications. The dynasty's struggles would no longer seem coincidental, but inherited. The traits she inherited from her maternal ancestry would also be confirmed. AI could validate genetic links to the Howard and Butler families, reinforcing Elizabeth's noble lineage at a biological level. One of the most powerful tools would be epigenetics. AI could examine how lifelong stress, trauma, illness, and environment altered her gene expression. This would show how Elizabeth's experiences reshaped her biology over time. It would also explain why her health worsened as her reign continued, not because she was weak, but because her body adapted to survival at a cost. Do you think Elizabeth I's health problems were inherited? Drop your answers in the comment section below. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to click on the next video on your screen, like this video, and subscribe to our channel for more updates.